All right, well, welcome to our Teen Mental Health First Aid Information session. We're really excited to be here with you today and want to start with just a general agenda of what we're going to be doing today. Those of you who are joining us live, welcome. And if you're joining us via recording a little bit later, we're glad that you're able to tune in and check this out. So our goal today is just to tell you a little bit more about us and about our program, to give you a quick opportunity overview. So we have a funding opportunity to bring teen mental health first aid to some counties in Missouri. We'll tell you a little bit more about that. And then we want to talk about what teen mental health first aid is and give you some more program details and things that will help you to be successful in your application. And then we'll wrap up talking a little bit more about some of the application eligibility requirements. I am excited to share that Ricky Barton is here with us. Ricky helps to implement one of the first pilot sites around the country that was here in Springfield, Missouri. And so Ricky's going to share some of her firsthand experiences with you as well. So thank you, Ricky, for joining us. And we'll hear from her a little bit later toward the end of our time together. But she may chime in with some added details along the way or some added questions. In Zoom, I want you to feel comfortable asking questions in the chat box along the way, or even unmuting if it's more complex and you're more comfortable with that. We'll also have some time for questions at the end if that feels more comfortable for you as well. So we'll try to keep an eye on that chat box and keep an eye on your questions as we go forward. Let's do some introductions in terms of who's coming to the table here when it comes to this teen mental health first aid program. So mental health first aid includes 3 different curricula. It includes teen mental health first aid, adult mental health first aid, and youth mental health first aid. Youth and adult are both programs that are designed to be taught to adults, whereas our teen mental health first aid program is a newer program and it's designed to be taught to 10th, 11th, or 12th graders. One of the things that we're really proud of here in Missouri is that Missouri's Department of Mental Health helped to bring mental health first aid to the United States in 2008. So originally that was just the adult program, and then later the youth program, and then most recently the teen program. Missouri's Department of Mental Health has partnered with the National Council for Mental Well-Being and the state of Maryland. And so you probably have seen the National Council for Mental Well-Being's name on some of this teen mental health first aid stuff, if you've taken a look at all. So they oversee the teen program currently nationally, but Missouri is a great partner and supporter of that. So we are providing the opportunity here through the Department of Mental Health. That's where the funding is coming through. Specifically, that funding is coming through a SAMHSA grant, so Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, a disaster grant for 27 counties that were impacted by natural disasters in 2019. So I know that you may have seen the list of the counties who are eligible. It might seem a little bit random. That's why those counties were selected, is that they were impacted by a disaster. And so we're really grateful that we have the opportunity through this funding stream that the Department of Mental Health holds to be able to offer this training for free. I work for the Missouri Institute of Mental Health. We help to manage the state's initiative. So we work really closely with the Department of Mental Health and help to manage the initiative around the state. So I'll be the lead contact in terms of questions that you might have or any follow-up that you might have after this. And I'll make sure that I share my contact information later on in the presentation if you want to reach out and follow up with me at all. So that's a little bit about the players here. Let's do this. Let's hear a little bit more about you before we go any further. I'm going to launch just a really quick poll here and get a sense of who we have in the room. So if you would go ahead and complete the poll that you see popping up. We're just asking what describes your organization and a little bit about your role. All right. Fantastic, thank you. So we have some folks from prevention organizations, from community mental health centers, clinicians, and some program staff here. So thanks for being here. We're glad to hear a little bit about you and glad to learn about your interest in teen mental health first aid. All right, so let's talk a little bit about this overview. I've alluded to this already, and if you've seen any of our flyers, you may know some of this information, but we are bringing 2 teen mental health first aid instructor trainings to Missouri. And so we have space for about 32 instructors. We don't know exactly how many schools or youth serving organizations might wind up being eligible because it might depend a little bit on how many people they are serving and how many instructors they might need. But we're going to ballpark about 16 schools or youth serving organizations are going to be able to receive the teen mental health first aid training as a part of this opportunity. I mentioned before, but here on the screen, you'll see the grant really specifically serves these counties. So the applicants to this opportunity should be a school or a youth serving organization in one of these counties. Right? That's a pretty firm requirement. We know there also might be individual people who might be instructors and are interested in attending this, and we need to make sure they get linked up with a school or youth serving organization that actually has the students in order to apply for this project. So individual people can't apply. We really need to make sure that they are linked up with an implementing site like a school or a youth serving organization. And as a part of this opportunity, we are going to be able to cover the costs for instructor trainings, which is not an inexpensive cost, about $3,200 per person. So we will cover the cost of the instructor training for the instructors that are identified by that school or youth serving organization. And then we're also able to cover one of the other program costs, which is manuals for the teens. So each teen receives a really nice manual as a part of the course, and it costs about $9 per person. And so we are budgeting to be able to cover that. Our implementation timeline is primarily this spring semester, but we may be able to extend a little bit into next fall as well. So that's a little bit about the opportunity. Here's sort of our timeline to help get you oriented to where we are. So right now we are preparing for applications. And I'm going to share at the end of the webinar again the document that you may have seen, probably the invitation that you saw to get here today, that has some of these details on it as well as a link to our application. But we're asking schools or youth serving organizations to apply by October 5th. And then we will notify, pretty quick turnaround, we will notify people of the selection by October 12th. There will be an additional step in the application process that schools will actually need to register with the National Council for Mental Wellbeing and be approved there, and help us to really firm up our instructors, fully identify who those instructors will be. And then our tentative timeline for instructor courses is listed here. So our instructor classes are 3-day courses. They'll be held virtually, but they're full-day sessions each of those 3 days. So an instructor should plan to attend either of those, one of those 2 sessions. And we will, again, work with the selected sites to make sure we've got the right people at the right sessions and able to get everyone there in attendance. Our hope then is that we know this is a little bit of a tight timeline, but we're working within some of the funding limitations of the grant, and that we will be able to start training teens in the spring 2022 semester. So January or after, start training teens. That's the goal timeline, to be able to train that semester. So let me know if you have any questions about that timeline in the chat box. I'll talk a little bit more later about some of the processes in the application, but we wanted to start up front, giving you just a sense of where we are right now. All right. So we mentioned this briefly already, but the opportunity funds two things. It funds the instructor training and it funds the required manuals. So that's what we're able to fund as a part of this opportunity. So those schools or youth serving organizations who are selected will have those materials funding. Thanks, Samantha. A total of 32 instructors, so 16 instructors per training. So we'll have to make sure that we get the right number in each of those, but yes, we have space for a total of 32 instructors. And I'll talk a little bit more about the math and how many schools we can serve later, because it's a little bit tricky. It really depends on the size of the school or the organization and some of their implementation plans about how many folks will ultimately be able to select. All right, I've got one more poll here just to check in with folks, and I want to get a sense from you about some of where you're starting. So your interest and your familiarity here with mental health first aid. So go ahead and complete this quick 2-question poll. Right, fantastic. Thank you. So we have some familiarity here in this group. So many folks are already an instructor or have taken some type of a mental health first aid course, or at least familiar with the program. And then there's a variety of interest in terms of being interested in implementing at my school or in my community and becoming an instructor. If there's any other interests that you want to share, please feel free to do that in the chat box as well. Okay. Well, fantastic. Well, let's do this. Let's talk a little bit more about the program itself. And then we will talk again at the end about the implementation planning and this opportunity in a little bit more detail. So why teen mental health first aid? You likely are familiar with this statistic that we know that about 1 in 5 teens in the United States experience a mental health challenge by the time they're 18. And so we recognize that this is common and prevalent, and I think is of increasing concern. I think especially as we're thinking about the pandemic, it's really coming to the forefront in terms of our thinking and how the return to classrooms affects teens. And so we recognize that it's important for us to be addressing the mental health of our young people. We also know that many young people with mental health challenges don't seek help. So here's some data from Australia where the program began, and also from the United States. And we see especially here in the United States, about 64% of young people who experience a mental health challenge didn't seek help. And so there's a large gap that we can help to fill by encouraging young people to seek the help that they deserve. Who do young people seek help from? Right? They often seek help from parents, from friends, boyfriends, girlfriends, significant others. And so it's, as we kind of look across this board, while it is wonderful to train those other folks in people's lives, we also really need to make sure that teens are equipped to help each other. Right? So youth mental health first aid serves a really important role of having trusted adults around young people so that they can seek help from them. But we know that often teens are talking to their friends as well. And so it's really important that friends are able to respond in an appropriate manner. So that's really some of the reason behind why teen mental health first aid came to be. And we are just really excited that this program is taking off in the United States. The program is designed to be taught to high school students in grades 10, 11, or 12. So this does at the present exclude 9th graders. So just 10th, 11th, or 12th graders. And it can be taught in a couple of different ways. We know that different schools or different organizations might have different parameters, like block scheduling or not block scheduling. So it can be delivered in 3 90-minute sessions or 6 45-minute sessions. Soon it will also be able to be delivered virtually in the 6-session format. So currently it can be delivered in person, but soon it should be available virtually as well, should schools wind up being virtual in their instruction. There's some added safety components that are going into that consideration to shift things to virtual, as you can imagine, but that may be an opportunity as well. And again, this is talking about the delivery to the young people themselves, right? Our instructor training I mentioned already will be virtual, will be held over Zoom, but the structure of the course itself right now is to be delivered primarily in person with the option to do a blended or a virtual delivery soon. And blended delivery is where young people would do some portions of the course asynchronously or on their own, followed by portions taught by an instructor. Currently, the class is designed to be all instructor-led. And again, in order to teach the class, I can't just go out there as an individual and say, you know what, I want to teach a group of teens that I get to sign up from the community. It needs to be affiliated with an organization like a school district or a youth serving organization. And there's some safety components that are part of that. And so that's, we'll talk more in detail about that later as well. So that's a little bit about what the program is. Again, feel free to ask questions in the chat box if we can clarify anything. The learning objectives for the program are up here. I know this is a little bit of a dense slide, but this maps on to the 6 sessions pretty well. So the goal is really to recognize those early warning signs that a friend is developing a mental health challenge. And we use the term friend pretty loosely. Friend means peer, right? Anyone that you might come into contact with. So we really want to make sure that young people are equipped to help anyone in their grade level, in their school that they may come into contact with. So recognize those signs in a friend, recognize the warning signs that a friend may be experiencing a mental health crisis, particularly suicide. Talk about some other mental health crises as well, including substance use, but we want to make sure that young people are equipped to be able to manage those crisis situations. Describe how to talk to a friend about mental health and how to seek help. Explain when and how to get a responsible adult involved. This is a very, very important part of the class. We talk a lot about connecting to a trusted adult. We want to make sure that the things that teens are equipped to do are age appropriate, and that oftentimes even I, right, need to get someone else involved. So we need to also teach teens when it's appropriate to get someone else involved, especially in a crisis situation. We want to discuss how to find appropriate and helpful resources about mental health challenges and professional help, and then apply the action plan to help a friend experiencing a mental health or challenge or crisis. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the action plan here, actually. So if you've ever taken an adult or a youth mental health first aid class, you know we have an action plan. It goes along with this koala. And this actually isn't a huge part of our teen mental health first aid curriculum. Their action plan is pretty different than the action plan in our youth or our adult class. So you see it up here. It's look, ask, listen, help your friend. And those are there's a few more words in there too, but we want young people to be able to look for warning signs, ask how they are, right? Ask their friend how they are, listen, help connect them with an adult, and know that their friendship is important. So how they continue to support and interact with someone is important. And so that's the action plan that they apply as teens. There's a lot of different exercises and ways that they get familiar with this plan and work on applying this. And there's a really true emphasis on getting a trusted adult involved. And I say that a lot because I think sometimes schools or organizations may feel hesitant. What are we training teens to do? Are we training folks to become mini counselors? And that is very clearly outside of the scope of a teen mental health first aider. It's outside of the scope of a youth or adult mental health first aider as well. It's not what we train in any of our curricula, but it's really a clear emphasis throughout the course. So that's our action plan. Here's the course outline. I'm sorry, I misspoke earlier. This maps onto the 6 sessions. You can get a sense of what those 6 sessions look like. If you choose the 3-session option, you would consolidate some of these learning objectives or some of these objectives together. But the sessions start by talking about mental health in general, what mental health challenges are, how common they are, the impact that they have on our lives. Then we move into how we can help a friend who's in crisis, particularly thinking about the crisis of suicide, using the action plan in a crisis situation. There are some great videos that I think our teens are really responsive to in terms of hearing from some actual real life teens, and then also seeing some videos with actors portraying teens. This video in particular is some actors helping each other through a crisis of suicide. And so we see a great example of that. Helping a friend who is in another type of crisis is the next session. So thinking about threatening violence or harm, engaging in self-injury, experiencing a traumatic event like bullying, abuse, or assault, and again, practicing that action plan in those crisis situations. And then we see helping a friend who may be in crisis due to substance use, and helping a friend who may be developing a mental health challenge, right? And we use that mental health challenge, recognizing that mental health challenges can come in lots of different shapes and sizes. And so we want to be able to respond not just in a crisis, but as someone is developing or experiencing maybe some earlier warning signs of a mental health challenge. The last session really is focused on a lot of hope. So talks about recovery and resiliency, and is we want to make sure that the message of hope is clear throughout, but it's a really nice way to wrap up the sessions. So that is the outline of the class. I want to tell you a little bit about the research behind teen mental health first aid. So I mentioned the program began in Australia, so there's some Australian research base as well. And I'm happy to share even more data than I will share explicitly on the slides today. But the program began in the United States in 2019 and really was designed to gather research right away. So started with just 8 pilot sites and then expanded the next year to, I think, 32 sites around the country. And even with some of the disruptions that happened with COVID, they collected data from over 2,500 students in 54 different schools. And so you can see just some of the highlights here that I think really stand out and speak volumes about the power of this program. So the teens, you can see pre-post really increase their level of comfort asking a friend if they're thinking about suicide. Much fewer people said that they would avoid talking about suicide because it might put an idea in their friend's head. So we kind of reduced some of that misinformation. And there's a pretty significant increase in feeling confident to help a friend in need. So those are some exciting statistics to look at. We can, again, I can share some additional data and information if you're curious about that. And we continue to gather and collect that data. I think it's also neat to see the instructors who taught the class, who are adults, also provided some feedback. 98% thought it was relevant. 99% believed it made a positive impact, and the schools and youth serving organizations who implemented the course reported referring 500 teens to school or community mental health services. So in addition to this, there's sort of the pipeline that was created to be able to identify and provide support to young people who are in need. We'll talk a little bit more about one of the mechanisms to do that here in just a moment as well. But some really exciting data to start with here. Again, if there are questions, feel free to let me know in the chat box. I'll do my best to address them as we go. Let's talk a little bit about the implementation requirements in more detail. And again, this is a little bit of a dense slide, but it's really important when we're supporting teens that we're thinking about the safety that goes along with teaching teen mental health first aid. And so there are quite a few stipulations that we want to make sure that folks are aware of up front so that we understand the commitment of teaching teen mental health first aid. So the program, as we mentioned earlier, is to be taught to 10th, 11th, or 12th graders, ages 15 to 18. At this time, no college students and no 9th graders. We really want to make sure it's those 10th, 11th, or 12th graders. The class is designed to be delivered in a standard classroom size. So if at your school or in your organization, there are usually about 20 kids together, we would recommend that be the classroom size. But it's not designed to be like in a large assembly style that everyone gets taught at the same time. It's really designed as a classroom learning tool for people to be able to ask questions, to engage, to participate in the activities. Classes should take place with at least a day between sessions and over the course of no more than 3 weeks. So not back-to-back days. We want there to be a little bit of time to process and certainly not all in the same day. We can't just sit there and do all 6 sessions concurrently. We want there to be a little space between days. So there needs to be a day between sessions. So not Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. It can be done Monday, Wednesday, Friday, for example. And should be completed from start to finish over the course of 3 weeks. We'll have Ricky share a little bit more later on about some of the things that she has seen, but we've seen folks implement this in a lot of different places. So maybe they pick the 10th graders and all 10th graders take geography class. And so we make space in a geography class or a health class, some class that a whole grade level is taking. And that brings us to our next point. And this is sometimes a little bit challenging to wrap our minds around, but if teaching at a school, the program needs to be taught to an entire grade level. If teaching in a youth serving organization, it should be taught to the whole program. So we want to be really careful that we aren't just picking out specific groups of students to be identified to take the class, because anyone could come into contact with a friend who's experiencing a mental health challenge. So the fear without this stipulation is that maybe certain groups of kids might be identified, or certain groups of young people might be identified and say, well, no, you're the peer mentors, you all should be the ones to be trained, or no, you're the kids who maybe have some more challenges, so you all should be the ones to be trained. And we really want to take that out of the conversation, that it's a program that should be implemented across the entire grade level, or if it's a youth serving organization, across the whole program. Yeah, Rachel, did you have a question?
Good morning. Yeah, I do. Let's say that it's a boys and girls club or some sort of aftercare organization that serves like kindergarten through 12th grade. If they need to have their whole program trained, that would just be for their secondary programming, correct? That starts
Correct.
at freshman. Okay.
Yeah, so still only within these grade levels. And I think if that program, for example, had just 11th grade programming, there could be a conversation about just training your 11th graders if they were already kind of typically divided that way. We just want to make sure we're not like subdividing groups that are usually together within that grade level. Yeah, great clarification.
While we're on this topic, if I can jump in, what I saw in implementation is when you're doing an entire school grade, there's almost this culture of we're all in this together. We would always start the lesson by telling those students, like, every one of your peers in your grade are going through this year. It kind of developed this really neat culture of them just understanding this was really, really important for everybody to go through. And it helped them to grab onto the ownership of the program. I felt like I saw that happen in the classrooms when we were implementing it. So while it may seem daunting to do all of your 10th or 11th or 12th graders, it really did actually, the students grabbed a hold of it more rather than feeling like maybe they were selected for one reason or another. It kind of, like Rachel said, it just cuts that part out, and it's like we're all in this together, and it really bolsters the message of the program to have everybody going through it. So just wanted to chime in with that.
Perfect. Thank you, Ricky. Yeah, I appreciate that. But I think there's some real benefit. It can feel daunting, but how cool is it to have a culture shift within a grade level? And then, if you train your 10th graders this year, and then the next year, they're 11th graders, you're training your next set of 10th graders, think about how that can really shift the culture of a whole building. So I appreciate that. One of the other requirements, because of the strong emphasis on getting a trusted adult involved, is we want to make sure there are lots of trusted adults around who are equipped to help out. And again, we don't need trusted adults who are all counselors or social workers. While those people are wonderful to have around, we need some trusted adults who know how to access those folks, who know how to listen and how to respond appropriately. And so we ask that schools or implementing sites have at least 10% of the adult staff trained in youth mental health first aid prior to teaching the teen mental health first aid. So prior to teaching the teen mental health first aid, have 10% of the staff trained in youth mental health first aid. If you are sitting here thinking about that and that feels like a deterrent for you, our organization is happy to connect you with one of the prevention resource centers in your area. If you're not already connected, happy to work with you to support you achieving that goal as you're preparing for teen mental health first aid. So that is another one of the requirements. I have a couple more here. I will add too that we have found that many schools or youth serving organizations have offered youth mental health first aid trainings to parents or caregivers or other folks around teens. And I think that has been really well received. We found that many teens, after being more comfortable talking about mental health themselves, went home and talked to family and friends, and not everyone was prepared or equipped to be able to respond. And so having some youth mental health first aid training available to family has also proven to be really helpful. So that's an additional thing to consider, to think about, although not a requirement. One of the other things that's really important is safety, right? So a lot of this centers around safety, but sites need to have a safety protocol in place to address how they would support a teen. So we want to make sure that if a teen is experiencing distress during a session, that they have someone that they can talk to right away. We ask that there be some type of a mental health professional, a counselor available during sessions, so that there's a counselor on site if a young person experiences some distress. That person doesn't necessarily have to be an employee of the organization. It could be someone from your local community behavioral health center who is able to work with you in that area. But we need to make sure that there's a protocol in place and that there is a mental health professional on site during sessions. One of the ways that we identify teens who may need some additional support is through an exit ticket. So at the end of each class, teens turn in an exit ticket that it helps them. It can be customized a little bit, but one of the things it does is gives them the chance to say, I'd like someone to follow up with me. And it also gives them a chance to ask some questions anonymously. There are some other great benefits to it too, but it really helps teens to have a discreet way of asking for help for themselves or for someone else, especially if they now, as a result of taking this class, have recognized maybe some signs or symptoms that they're feeling or that someone else might be feeling. And so a site needs to be thinking about the plan to respond to that. So one example of this is, what if your class is the very last class of the day? How are we going to make sure we've read through all of those exit tickets before the teens leave our building? We need to just be thinking a little bit about how we can follow through, who will be reading those exit tickets, how will we make sure that someone gets connected to the appropriate professional if needed. That's where that number 500 came earlier. So of the 500 youth that we mentioned earlier who got connected into some professional help, this is one of the avenues for identifying that self-indication of who might want some additional support. Each school or organization needs to agree to kind of follow the rules here. So just to follow the policies and procedures, again, with teens, we really want to make sure that people have the logistics in place to support young people. And we can't just, like I mentioned earlier, go and teach teen mental health first aid at a site that isn't registered with the National Council. So once you are certified as a teen instructor, you can teach at more than one place. So I know that we might have some prevention resource centers listening in, and that you might work with different school districts. It's appropriate for you as a teen instructor to work at more than one school district to help to provide that support. But both of the districts need to be registered with the National Council as an implementing site, or both of the sites need to be an implementing site. So we want to make sure that those things are in place. So that's a lot of implementation requirements. A lot of times there are some questions about this, or Ricky, if there's anything that you're thinking of that might be a question that I missed, please feel free to chime in. Or folks, if you have anything in the chat box, let me know. All right. Well, hopefully I didn't just scare you off there. We just want people to know upfront what you're getting into, what the expectations are. And again, I think a lot of these implementation requirements really focus around the safety of our teens, and that's the goal. Let's talk a little bit about what the instructor training process looks like. So I mentioned earlier that sites are going to apply. So a school or a youth serving organization is going to apply, and ultimately it's the sites that will be selected. They will identify how many instructors they need and help us to identify who those instructors are. Instructors could be from your own organization. So it could be a teacher, it could be a staff member of a school. It could also be someone from a different organization, like partnering with a prevention resource center, or someone who is in your community who's able to provide some of that assistance in terms of teaching the class. We also do want you to know that we ask that there be 2 adults in the classroom while the class is being taught. So one of them needs to be the person teaching the class. The other could be the classroom teacher, someone else around, just in case there are any classroom management things that need to be addressed. It's important to have 2 adults around. I lost my train of thought there. I was going to say something else, but so the school or the site is going to be the person that applies and helps us to identify who those instructors are. How do you pick how many instructors you need? I'm going to leave that one a little bit to Ricky later. It's kind of tricky to know. It's going to depend a lot on your plan. So we want you to think about your implementation plan and what's going to work for you. If you're teaching everybody at the exact same time and you've got 300 students, you might need a lot of instructors. If you're just pulling everybody out at 9 a.m. on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, you might need a lot of instructors. You might need 10 instructors to run all of those classes concurrently. That might be a little bit tricky. So maybe instead there's a way to stagger it throughout the day, depending on when geography classes again, or when that health classes that you're going to embed the program in. So you want to think about that. There's a loose guideline recommending about 1 instructor for every 150 students. That just gives us a general ballpark, but it really depends on your site, how and where you're going to implement this. And we know every school and organization is a little bit different in terms of what's going to logistically work for you. So we will ask a little bit about that on the application process of what kind of your game plan is. So we want you to at least start to be forming some of those thoughts. You don't have to have a perfect game plan together, but we want you to start to put some thought in, because that helps to determine how many instructors might be needed. If you've got a smaller organization too, right? Maybe you just have 30 students, you may be able to do 1 instructor. We may also be able to partner you up with an instructor who's teaching somewhere else in your community, and to be able to reach even more young people. This is what to expect of the instructor training. So we've mentioned that it's a 3-day training process. So those folks who ultimately are identified by the sites as an instructor will go through a 3-day training process. Prior to attending the training, there's a little bit of pre-work that can be done, or that needs to be done. They will watch some videos of someone facilitating a teen mental health first aid class. And they will work through, we have an instructor prep workbook that they will take some notes in as they do that. Then you can expect 3 pretty full days of training. Although I will say that we give some nice generous breaks in those times. So you'll see those reflected on the calendar. So instructors will become oriented to the movement of teen mental health first aid. We'll have a chance to process through the videos that they watched already, kind of unpack the curriculum, talk a lot about student safety and classroom management techniques. And then we'll get prepared for their teach back assignments that come on the 3rd day of the training. The 2nd day of the training, they really will focus in on the rubric that's used to evaluate their presentation. They will have a chance to be coached and to work with a partner in preparation. So there's a lot of in-class preparation time to prepare again for the teach back. This is the thing I keep talking about. On the 3rd day of the class, each instructor candidate will teach back a small section, a 15-minute section of the curriculum that they will be assigned. So they will have a chance to practice this with some of their peers, and they will receive a score there. Attendance in instructor trainings does not guarantee certification, although we certainly work really hard with instructors to make sure that they get to that goal. There are lots of opportunities for coaching and support along the way, but we want folks to take it seriously. We want to make sure that the product that is going out there to teach teens is safe and it's within the guidelines of fidelity to the program. They wrap the day up by talking a little bit more about some implementation pieces that they'll need to know and going over the implementation guide before they graduate. Again, this is all going to be done via Zoom, so all done remotely here virtually. So some good breaks are built in to help to accommodate that, a 60-minute lunch break and some 30-minute morning breaks on the first 2 days. So that's what to expect of the instructor training process. All right, I have talked a lot and I appreciate your attentiveness. I'm going to turn it over to Ricky just to share some insights, and especially if you have any questions about what it's actually like to implement. I know we have some other folks who on the line today who also have implemented at their organization. So if you want to share any additional thoughts or tips for folks, please feel free to chime in the chat box or by unmuting. But Ricky, thanks for taking it away.
Absolutely. Well, I am, when I was talking with Rachel about sharing, there's kind of a big gray area in how to implement this best. And so what I thought it would be helpful is just to share our experience where we implemented, and that may generate some questions for you. And we'll talk a little bit more detail on the next slide about the actual, like how to think through implementation planning. But we started, as Rachel mentioned, as one of the first 8 sites in the US. So they brought it over and they did a pilot with only 8 locations, and we were one of them. So Kickapoo High School in Springfield, Missouri was selected as one of those. And so there were several instructors from my agency as well as from the school district. And so we were able to sort of share that implementation there. And we did choose 10th graders in all of that school. It's one of Springfield's largest high schools. And so the implementation at that time, they were still, like I said, it was a pilot. So they're still figuring out some of those nuances. So that was 3 75-minute sessions, which I'm very thankful that they have expanded the time frame for the different 3 90-minute or 6 45-minute sessions, because there were portions of that we felt like we were racing through just to get to the clock. So I'm really thankful that National Council sort of finessed that a little bit, but we implemented that through those 3 sessions. We presented it that way. And we really did see some incredible results from that. I mean, we had students who, at the end of the session, students fill out an exit ticket, and that helps them to identify if they have other questions, but also, if they feel like they need to talk to someone at the end of that day, or if they want to talk to somebody about a friend of theirs that they're concerned about. And we, the majority of them had great questions to ask, and most didn't need to talk, but the few youth that did really were very impacted by being able to connect with an adult right then and there. And so even that, very tangibly, we were able to help serve the youth who may be struggling with a mental health challenge in that moment from going through that course. But we also know that as a result of students going through that, through kind of just the qualitative data that we collected, from the school, students were coming to school staff, counselors saying, hey, I'm concerned about this friend of mine, or they bring their friend with them, and kind of promote that trust in an adult to talk about what they were going through or feeling or experiencing. So just from a very, the feels part of this before we get into practical, I mean, it really is a very, very impactful program. I love it. And I will sing its praises all day long because it's just so good and so impactful for those youth. So we did that there. And in the following school year, we were going to expand. They did a pilot, again, a second pilot, and we were allowed to expand it beyond what we originally did. And so we started with all of Springfield Public Schools, as well as a rural community down in Galena in Stone County. And we actually did all 10th, 11th, and 12th graders in that more rural school. So Springfield, we stuck with just 10th, but down in that rural area, we did 10th, 11th, and 12th. And it really, it was interesting to see the difference between the two. That was more the 10th, 11th, and the 12th because it was so small. They were all together. And the instructor that did that, it was just one person that could go down there and do 3 sessions. And that worked really well there. Whereas, as you can imagine, the largest school district in the state, we had to have a lot of support. So we got more school instructors trained. We had those in my agency who were working there. And so this kind of starts to lend into the actual, content of thinking through this. But for Springfield, what we did is we selected, just like Rachel's alluded to, everyone in 10th grade goes through social studies. And so we had worked with the school to identify what would be best. And this is coming from, I should say this, I'm not with the school district. We were with a prevention organization. But we were kind of, taking charge on the logistics part of it, working with the school district. And so we just we figured out based on their school calendar for the days when those social studies classes happened. And then we filled in the instructors as needed. And so that helped to have that partnership with that school district, because the schools, of course, and that's why schools need to be the ones applying for this, because you understand the nuances of your school's specific needs and where the classes would make sense to take place. Now, having said that, for this unique funding opportunity specifically, just be cognizant of the fact that some of your students may have gone through social studies in the fall. And if we're not implementing it until the spring, you need to make sure that those students are also able to get that education. So for this specific funding opportunity, just think through that so that you're not missing a whole group or section of students that maybe already went through the specific class, the health class or social studies or whatever. So thinking through that. So essentially, and unfortunately, that school year got disrupted by what. And so, we had to kind of put a full stop on that. But we were able to get a lot of students trained in the fall. And so it was a working together of the schools. Now, we had instructors who were school staff that were trained, but we also had that counselor in the room with us. And so that it does require a good amount of commitment in those days when that's happening. And so what we saw our school district do was pull counselors from other schools for that day. So if we were focused, for example, on Central High School, the counselors from Kickapoo might come and they might participate in, the classroom there. They don't teach, but they're just there for a student if they need that help. And so, and that large of a school district, it was helpful to be able to pull counselors from other schools in the event that nothing major was happening at their school. And so that's food for thought as well, is just where those will come from. But we saw that to be a very valuable thing to have those counselors there in the room with the education. And then, so that's kind of that. We'll get more into that in the next slide. But the other few points I wanted to make about implementation was, we had access to some funding through different civic organizations that supported our implementation. And through those funds, we bought things that were like fidget toys. So these bendies sticks, they're kind of this like silicone-y feeling thing that, you move and bend and you can just fidget with. And we found things like that to be really beneficial for the youth to have, something tactile for them to play with. Now, granted, were kids slapping themselves with them? Absolutely. But, we tried to keep that to a minimum, but really it helped them as we were processing some of those tougher topics. I would kind of scan the room while everyone was watching the suicide, intervention video. And, many of them are just watching, and playing with that. And so if you're able to find something that they can kind of fidget with, I would recommend it. It's of course not a required part of the program, but it is something that is helpful. And I find that this is something that's very easy to sell to a donor, to say, hey, we're implementing this great program that's going to help save lives and help teens identify signs of crisis in their peers. Would you mind to, give money to donate for us to do this? So just a food for thought there too. Let's see here. We did have, and in terms of implementation, and you can probably go to the next slide, Rachel, so we can start seeing what to think through. We did have one school that did a combo of the block scheduling of the 90 minutes. And they had one single class at the end of the day that was a 45-minute class. So we kind of, even in that school, we were working with both the 90-minute and the 45. And essentially we would just send our instructors for a full day. We would be there all day long, class. And it worked. It worked for us and for how we did that, and we implemented that. And as I mentioned, it really was powerful to see how the culture and just sort of the schools that we were in, the kids just latched onto this concept of wanting to help their peers. We're in a really fortunate time where mental health is starting to come to the surface as being an acceptable thing to talk about. And the younger generation is absolutely grabbing onto that, and they're willing to be vulnerable about where they are, where their peers are. And there's not that stigma that maybe existed, back when I was in high school or even generations before us. And so we saw that teens were eager for this. And I just wanted to communicate that too, that, we as adults were like, yay, let's save lives. But truly the youth were also like, we want to be there for our peers and for our friends. And, Rachel said that friend term is very loose. Absolutely. And the kids get that. They understood that, like, even the person that you may never talk to in your PE class, if you see that they're acting different, it's time to go and have a conversation with them. And they really grabbed onto that idea. So, Rachel, do you want to talk through this, or do you want me to go through? Okay. All right. And we'll let you chime in right after. But essentially, these are some thoughts and questions to think about. As a school district, who are we going to train? So as I said, one school district we worked with did 10th, 11th, and 12th graders together. And then the others were just 10th grade. The reason why Springfield Public Schools does that is they do the signs of suicide curriculum in 8th and 9th grades. And so then this was a really good fit for them right in 10th grade to sort of develop those leaders moving forward for their last couple years of high school. So that was their thought process behind it, but your school may have a different idea there. And so just thinking through what grades make the most sense for you to go through, and then where. So it's really not meant for an assembly. It is not meant for a giant, it's just because it's a content that's tough and you have conversations. So that classroom space, like, where are you going to do this? Is it going to be in a room that's, maybe removed from the rest of the building, or is it going to be like right smack dab, whatever your school needs that to be, for it to kind of be marked as a significant thing to go through? I think that will help a lot. And then this was always the tricky thing, is, the makeup sessions that's listed there. We did struggle a little bit with what happens if a student doesn't get to all 3 sessions or all 6 sessions. And Rachel, correct me if I'm wrong about this, but last time we implemented this, there's now 2 certificates. One is I completed all of the curriculum, and 2, I don't remember what they call it, but it's essentially just like a participation certificate. Yeah. And so that kind of answers that question. Now, certainly if your school's able to, you can potentially slide that student into another implementation hour where they would get that content, and then they could get that full completion certificate. But just as you know, with students and sports and sickness and all of those things, it's just like adults, right? Sometimes you just miss it. And because we have to do them spaced out, that becomes an issue. So just thinking through what that could possibly look like. And then those exit tickets that they're going to be filling out you have to have someone reviewing those right at the end of that class period so that you can identify if there's a student who has said, I am not okay, I need to talk to someone ASAP. So typically in the back of the room, us instructors were flipping through those real quick, and like the questions and stuff, like we can deal with those at the next session, but we're looking at those. The exit tickets are done in such a way that they're marking their emotion and they're saying, literally a checkbox if they want to talk to somebody. So we're looking through those pretty quickly. And then, as I said, just the nuances of figuring out how to best do it so that you have the instructor in the room, but you also have someone who's there as a mental health professional. And it could be that the counselor is just in the building, and available, but you've got the teacher of that classroom in the room. And then there's you. What you really just don't want is only you as a teen mental health first aid instructor in the room with 30 kids. It would just be difficult to work with any situation that might pop up. And so it would be really important that you have another adult in that room with you, that they could escort a student down to the counselor's office, or the counselor can just step outside the room with them, or whatever that might look like. So if you have any questions about implementation, I saw 2 chats, but I think those were Rachel dropping some info there. Yeah. So if you have any questions for me as someone who's maybe done this curriculum, I've bragged about how great the content is and how much youth love it and thought through some of that implementation stuff. But if you have any questions, I'm happy to. Yeah, Rachel.
Thanks for that info, Ricky. It's really helpful. For this particular grant, the 26 county coverage area was, flooding, tornado area. A lot of it is rural. So I'm very interested. I don't know if you have any of the data or like the pros and cons of the smaller school districts that did 10th, 11th, and 12th together. I think that could be a selling point for this particular grant because so many of the schools that are in these areas are very rural schools. And, when we first thought about teen mental health first aid, we were even thinking some schools would be so small that they might try to combine schools regionally that could all do a training together, across their high schools to try to pool their resources because not all of them even have school counselors. So any info about that particular way that you all did it would be really interesting. And then I had a question. I don't know if you all are familiar with the Missouri School Safety Academy, but through the Center for Education Safety at the Missouri School Board Association, we just launched our first Missouri School Safety Academy. And basically we are trying to train school resource officers, juvenile officers, and school safety officers about mental health. They're getting a basic academy training about safety in general, and then they'll be able to get additional advanced training on mental health. And originally, when we put this academy together a couple years ago, we were thinking they could get mental health first aid training as an advanced curriculum. But now I'm wondering about teen mental health first aid training. And so I'm curious, has there ever been a school district that has utilized school resource officers in combo with school counselors to do teen mental health first aid training?
That's a great question. Rachel, you may know the answer to that question off the top of your head. What I can speak to in terms of my experience here is all of the Springfield school resource officers have been trained in youth mental health first aid. The director of that program several years ago made that a top priority. And so they certainly helped with our 10% mark to make sure we got 10% of the adults trained in youth because they are. Now, I've not heard of that. That wasn't something that we specifically utilized was school resource officers in the classroom, but I love that idea because that could also help bolster so many other protective factors and connection with law enforcement and giving youth that positive view of them. And so that's a great idea.
Yeah, I don't know if other sites have done it or not, Rachel, but I agree. I think we don't want people to think too narrowly about who the instructors could be. Your instructors, yeah, absolutely could be a school resource officer. You could partner up different school districts. If you don't have an instructor identified, we don't want that to stop you from applying for this project. We are happy to help figure that out. And I think especially like if you are a small school district, that's pretty attractive in the application process because we can probably find some other folks in your area and make something work and serve even more teams. So don't let that stop you for sure. And absolutely, I think creatively about the folks that you have. And I think a school resource officer could be really a neat option.
Okay, thanks. I've got a listserv of SROs that are attending our Missouri School Safety Academy. Our first one was in August. Our next one is later this month. We got like 80 people registered from all across districts in the state. And so it would be a great, I think, a great weaving in of what we already had planned to do, just a slight difference there.
Yeah, for sure.
And circling back, Rachel, to your comment about the rural, I don't have the specific data pulled together like from those pre and post and exit ticket surveys. I know that one of the bigger concerns I have heard from the rural is how to access a school counselor for those students if the counselor's pulled aside by something different, and there may only be one for the whole district. And we have had those conversations with others who are interested in this program. And so I think the idea, if it's feasible, of melding together different school districts that could be kind of working together on this, I think is a great idea, because that's going to help give a little bit more manpower to the effort, and help kind of share those resources of both instructors as well as the mental health professionals or counselors. And, we know that those rural areas typically also lack access to behavioral health providers. And there's just, a lot that's there. And so thinking through that, but I like the idea of sharing those resources, because that would help with those students really getting the impact that they need.
Thank you so much. I have to hop off for another meeting, but this was great. I appreciate the time that you all spent this morning explaining it out. I'm excited for it. So
Yes,
take care.
Thanks, Rachel.
Bye.
All right. Well, I know we're a little bit over that hour mark. I have one final slide here about questions. I have put in the chat box to the document that outlines this. There's even some more detailed information on an FAQs form and a marketing package that are linked there. We encourage you to check that out. The link to the application is also there, so check it out. We try not to make the application too complicated. We don't want that to be the hurdle. And we also want you to know that we're here to support you. So if you don't have the school counselor piece figured out yet, if you don't quite have your instructors identified, that's not a problem. We're here to help with that, and that shouldn't prevent you from applying. You can always reach out to me. My email address is my first name dot last name, so rachel.taube@mimh.edu, mimh.edu, both M's as in Missouri. And I put that in the chat box as well. Be happy to answer any additional questions folks might have. And thank you so much for being here today. We really appreciate it. Thanks, Ricky, for sharing your experiences and really speaking so highly of the program. So I'm going to go ahead and stop our recording here.